Poland made a prediction about a scenario where Russia could launch a military attack. If Ukraine fails against Russia, the West could lose $3 trillion. Tensions are rising between Russia and the West in the Arctic. Poland made a prediction about a scenario where Russia could launch a military attack. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski made a prediction about a scenario where Russia could attack Poland in the future. In an interview with German newspaper Bild published on April 28, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said Poland would not be surprised if Russia attacked the country, but in the end Moscow would lose. Russia has attacked Poland many times in our 500 years of history. But in this scenario, Russia will lose, because we, the West, are much stronger than Russia, Mr. Sikorski said. Ukraine does not fight alone. Contrary to what often happened in the past, we will not fight alone, the Polish foreign minister added. Mr. Sikorski emphasized the importance of Ukraine winning the ongoing war with Russia. It's best to stop Russia in Ukraine, 500 to 700 kilometers east of here, the Polish diplomat added. Asked whether NATO members could be attacked by Russia in the future, Foreign Minister Sikorski said German politicians seem to acknowledge that Russia will only be ready to act in 4 or 5 years, and by then, Germany will also be ready. But the problem is that before Russia gets to Germany, they have to go through a number of other countries, Mr. Sikorski said. Previously, speaking before the House of Representatives on April 25, Foreign Minister Sikorski also stated that Russia's attack on any NATO country will certainly lead to Moscow's defeat. NATO has 3 times the force, 3 times the air defense resources, and 4 times the number of warships of Russia, he argued. Mr. Sikorski noted that Russia has just over 1.3 million soldiers after the first mobilization in September 2022. Meanwhile, NATO's force is 3.5 million people without needing to be mobilized, nearly 3 times larger than Russia's. The Polish diplomat also pointed out that the nominal GDP of NATO and EU countries is more than $45,000 billion, while that of Russia and Belarus is only $2,200 billion, which is 20 times less. Recently, some Western officials said that Russia could attack NATO countries within the next 5 to 8 years if it wins in Ukraine. The US-based Institute for the Study of War, ISW, said that there are currently some signs that Russia is preparing for a major conflict with NATO, including increasing the scale of defense production. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that Russia's defense industry is currently expanding to a scale that exceeds the needs for the military campaign in Ukraine. Excess weapons are being stockpiled. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin rejected these speculations. This is nonsense. Speculation that we will attack Europe after Ukraine is completely meaningless and only aims to scare their people to get money, Mr. Putin declared at the end of March. If Ukraine fails against Russia, the West could lose $3 trillion. Former British Armed Forces Minister James Heappey warned that Ukraine's defeat by Russia would cost the West $3 trillion in a new Cold War. In his article for the House magazine, Mr. Heappey noted that Ukraine needs more aid packages than those announced by its allies last week to win the war with Russia. A stalemate or a defeat by Ukraine promises a new Cold War that will last decades and cost trillions of dollars more, he emphasized. The former British Armed Forces minister pointed out that recent aid packages from the US and UK will not immediately help Ukraine turn the tide of battle and gain an advantage over Russia to launch a counterattack that would bring about war. Win quickly and completely. I expect that with the huge influx of aid from the West we will see a more stable front line, and while the fighting will be fierce, I do not expect Ukraine to liberate significant amounts of territory within the year now. He said Ukraine's brigades need to be trained so that their operations incorporate artillery, aerial firepower, and everything else they can throw at the Russians. At the same time, Mr. Heappey also expressed doubt that Ukrainian forces could defeat Russia in 2025 or even 2026. Previously, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak informed Ukrainian President Zelensky that the new British aid package for Ukraine would include millions of ammunition, hundreds of vehicles, and Storm Shadow long-range missiles. Tensions are rising between Russia and the West in the Arctic. Tensions between Russia and the West in the Arctic have increased significantly, with Moscow criticizing Washington's statements on the Arctic as well as increased U.S. military activity. That disagreement could come to a head when the Pentagon is expected to release a new Arctic strategy. According to Paul Gobel, an expert on Eurasia, who is Director of Research and Publication at the Azerbaijan Diplomatic Academy as well as held many different positions in the Ministry of State and the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, although overshadowed by the conflict in Ukraine, developments in the Arctic over the past month have set the stage for the region to become the next hotspot of economic, geopolitical, and economic confrontation. Military between Russia and the West. The latest tensions in this confrontation occurred at a meeting of the International Seabed Authority in Jamaica at the end of March. There, Russian representatives criticized the U.S. for new statements that Washington made, released last December about the Arctic and its mineral-rich seabed. Russian representatives emphasized that the U.S. is abusing international law to its advantage and causing conflicts with Russia, other Arctic powers and the whole world. According to Russian commentators and politicians, the Kremlin's response could include withdrawing from the Arctic Council, the Law of the Sea Treaty, and rejecting the 1990 Baker-Shevardnadze Agreement regarding the establishment of borders. Sea between Moscow and the West, while increasing military presence in the Arctic to counter NATO and the U.S. Three developments are making Russia more angry at America's latest moves in the Arctic. First, the expansion of NATO to include Finland and Sweden brings the Western alliance closer to Russia than ever before. Second, Moscow admitted that Russian President Vladimir Putin's expectations of expanding the Northern Sea route have been stalled due to Western sanctions, arising from the conflict in Ukraine. Third, the Pentagon said it would announce a new Arctic strategy as early as the end of April, based on 3 recent military exercises in the Arctic in just the past month. Many Russian scholars openly state that all of this constitutes a direct attack on Russia's national interests because it involves a region over which the Kremlin believes Moscow should have control. Private expert Gobel said that 3 other concerns weigh heavily on Russia behind these factors, making it likely that President Putin will decide to go beyond diplomatic tools. First and most immediately, the Kremlin argues that the actions of Western leaders in the Arctic stem from the belief that Russia is distracted and even weakened by the war in Ukraine. Many Russian commentators and officials are publicly calling and emphasizing that President Putin must respond strongly to the risk of the West weakening Russia elsewhere. Second, President Putin has considered expanding the Northern Sea route as the centerpiece of his plan to turn to the east and his efforts to reaffirm Russia's power. Recent signs that the route is in trouble have not changed his mind. Rather, the Russian leader has committed more resources to the effort out of fear that the project's failure would weaken Russia in its relations with China and the West. Third, like many Russians, President Putin seems concerned that, if Moscow loses control of the Northern Sea route, it could lose control of Russia's northern regions. However, Russia still has some diplomatic leverage, such as getting the rest of the world and even U.S. allies to respond to Washington in expanding its presence in the Arctic. Russian diplomatic officials attempted to do just that at the meeting in Jamaica, highlighting the differences between the U.S. and Canada in particular and between Washington and other countries in general. Moscow has also made such efforts in other locations. It is almost certain that such efforts will continue and even intensify in the near future. However, such diplomatic actions are unlikely to prevent the West and the United States from increasing their presence in the Arctic, unless Russia shows military strength to support them.